So let me show you one of the easiest ways employers tell the difference between a good candidate and a really strong candidate. So let's say you are sitting in an interview with me and I want to assess your leadership maturity. I ask you and another candidate the same type of question. How do you give a difficult feedback to an employee? Actually, what good candidates you do is they give very shallow responses tied to no frameworks and models. And their responses are usually very brief. They say things like, I'll speak to the employee privately, I would explain what they did wrong, listen to their side of the story, and together we agree on how they can improve. That's a good answer. It's practical and it makes sense. And the candidate clearly understands what a manager is supposed to do. But really strong candidates don't end at that level. The strong candidates, those who unlock those big packages, they go so deep and you feel naturally how they anchor their communication to existing standards, frameworks, models, and tools. They say things like, I'll run a 360-degree assessment. However, in my assessment, I'll make sure I capture the specific reasons why the collaborators raised those concerns. Then, I will triangulate the data and segregate the responses across the 4 quadrants of my feedback framework, which I use. I normally use the Johari window. Then, after that, I will look for the similarities between the colleagues and the employee concerned. And then, in the responses, I would figure out the differences. I would identify the potential blind spots of that employee. Once I understand those blind spots, I would figure out the possible solutions before ever I connect with the employee. After that, I would have the conversation privately because I don't want the employee to feel attacked. I would first try to understand whether they are actually aware of the behavior raised by their colleagues and how it has been perceived by those colleagues. That's where I will use my window to create that awareness. Then, when giving the feedback itself, I will use the SBI framework, which helps me to expose the specific situation, the behavior that hides behind that situation, and the impact it has caused tied to business drivers to ensure I am addressing a specific situation, the observable behavior, its impact, rather than making the feedback about the person's character. And from there, we would agree on what needs to change and how we'll follow up. Now, notice something. I didn't have to stop the second candidate to ask what framework they would use, how they would identify blind spots, how they would structure the feedback. They brought the thinking naturally into the answers by themselves. And that's where employers see the difference. Both candidates gave very good answers, but one demonstrated knowledge of the task, while the other demonstrated depth of understanding. One knows what to do. The other actually understands why to do it, how to structure it, what frameworks support it, and how to apply it. And that is what employers look for when assessing candidates, because someone can give you the perfect interview answer and still have very little depth. But when a candidate naturally connects their experiences to principles, frameworks, and reasoning without you having to pull it out of them, you start seeing how deeply they actually understand the work.